Hi and welcome everybody to the Fertility podcast, where you will be empowered to learn how to thrive and conceive with endometriosis. If you want to understand more about your endo, how this can affect your fertility, and how you can personally take action to optimise your health and life, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Dr. Lizzie Alexander, the Fertility specialist, and I'm a marine biologist turned integrative nutrition and health coach and holistic massage therapist. Most importantly, I know what it's like to have chronic fatigue, endo, and struggle with fertility. I am now a super busy yet thriving wife, business owner, and mother of a gorgeous little boy. Join me every Wednesday as I jump into topics that will support and guide your healing and fertility journey, from health and nutrition, lifestyle, emotional and spiritual support, and much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy listening. This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Resource Library. Inside the library, you'll discover the free resource hub with 3 great downloadable products to get you started. An ebook called 5 Ways to Start Dropping Your Pain and Optimise Your Fertility. A short guide to sperm health, great for getting your man started on improving his own health. And an infographic with 88 things I did to get pregnant. Make sure to check out the show notes for the link. Hey beautiful, welcome to episode 44. So the last couple of weeks I've had a spout of bad luck, or I don't know, just sitting under a rain cloud. This is why I didn't get an episode out to you last Wednesday, which I'm really sorry about. I managed to crack my phone screen, then a day later I dropped my laptop and smashed it, and I put a huge dent in the side of the car. And to top it off, Ethan had a tummy bug and was off childcare all week. So it was a really expensive week, and it was really very trying to find ways to work on an iPad that wasn't connected to, my work, etc. It was pretty difficult. I managed to record this episode on my iPad, but then I couldn't get it off to process it. So I'm having to re-record it again this week, and I'll put out this week's episode, which was an interview, out next week. So you'll have this one next week, this week, next week, and the week after. So you have 3 back-to-back actually before we get to the kind of fortnightly again. So for this episode, I thought I would do a different one to normal. It wasn't meant to be a long one, but it's ended up being so. And I thought I would share my personal postpartum trying to conceive journey for our second baby so far, what I've been doing to improve my fertility, where we're at, how I'm feeling. So why am I doing this? Well, I often have clients who want to know how I'm getting on. And I know sometimes it can be reassuring to understand what others are going through. It will also be really helpful for those who are also struggling with secondary subfertility or struggling in their sort of postpartum recovery. I suppose it's a bit like a case study, which has made me think that I might do an episode where I share the work that I've done with one of my clients, where we've been successful in getting a baby, what we did to get there. Whether this was getting pregnant during our work or afterwards. I might even see if they would join me for a partial interview, which would be really good. Now, I would love to know if this is something you're interested in. I'll probably put a poll up on Instagram or something. Just so you know, my next solo episode next month will be on what can be done to optimise ovulation and fertilisation, as promised in my last solo episode. I know there's been a bit of a gap, but I wanted to do this one today on my personal trying to conceive episode. So here's this week's episode. So where do I start? I'm going to try and keep it short, but there are some things that I may end up diving deeper into, and there are some things that I know that I'll definitely talk about on a separate occasion, maybe in a future season. So if I skip over some things and don't go into loads of detail, bear with me. I suppose you could say that we've been conceiving for now about 2 years, but actually it's not as long as that, which I'll explain about in a minute. So I breastfed Ethan for 18 months, which is a bit longer than I intended, but that's another story completely. I'm trying to remember when I got my period back, and I think it was about a year post-birth. It wasn't sort of in that, some people get it back within 6 months. It was about a year, and I still was breastfeeding, but I wasn't obviously exclusively breastfeeding because I'd started feeding him solids at 6 months. Now, I remember at the time not being ready to trying to start to conceive at that point, a year. I was just short of 41, but I was really very tired still, as Ethan he was not a born sleeper, and he was a particularly bad teether. He found everything very painful, and I was just beyond exhausted. Got to the point where actually I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and I ended up having to go away to a retreat in Wales, where there was a tiny house in the hills for a total of a week. And this was just before the next lockdown, before Christmas, literally so I could sleep. It had got that bad, to be honest. I just knew then that I needed to rest. And to be honest, it had been, and it still is, very much a key part of my postpartum recovery. I did it again in February, just gone, after solo parenting for 6 months, just because Ethan still was and still is waking up between 2 to 4 times a night, which we're trying to work on again at the moment. We kind of go through phases, and he sleeps for a while and then doesn't sleep for a while, but that's again another story. So I knew that at age 41, when I got my period back, that making sure my health needed to be optimal if I wanted to avoid having a miscarriage or any risks to my baby's health. Now, I won't lie, both of these things absolutely petrify me, and I think those feelings inside are perhaps what's driven me to take a slower journey. And that's why it's kept me, I've kept putting off trying to conceive for a while, much to my husband's annoyance, to be honest. But I vowed to listen to my body and trust my instinct and be as patient as I could with the whole process. I mean, with some of it, there are definitely mistakes that I've made along the way. I've learned from that process. But that is, that's why I've wanted to pass on some of these things that I've learnt, good steps and mistakes that I've learnt. So how long have we actually been trying to conceive? Well, we didn't really start trying until summer 2020. So Ethan was 18 months old by that time. And I started to feel more myself by then. But even then, my body just kept throwing me signs that it just wasn't ready. So even though I was getting a bit more energy back, there were things like strong histamine reactions, estrogen dominance, sky high blood sugar, and just this massive fatigue, which would come on in waves. Now, as I said, I vowed to listen to my body. So even though we were sort of trying, I knew in the back of my head I wasn't quite right. And this comes down to this whole mind-body mindset. And it's amazing what your body probably listens to. The fact that I didn't feel I was ready, so maybe my body was just holding me back because it wanted me to address a number of things. But at the same time as this was going on, Pete was away quite a lot on exercise. So we'd missed a number of fertile times because we weren't trying to schedule it around it. And I definitely felt more ready by early spring 2021, so a year ago. And then it was a case of only having 4 or 5 cycles before he then was deployed on a 6-month tour to the Middle East. And then that took us up to the end of January this year. And then Pete was unfortunately battling with some personal health issues, which meant we really had to focus on him and still on me at the same time. So it's only been in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 months that we've been seriously trying to conceive again. So once again, time is against us being together, because we're going to be separated for another 2 to 3 months this summer as we kind of move overseas. He'll go first and then we'll follow. Now, the reason I tell you this is because it's quite insightful to think, wow, we've been trying to conceive for over 2 years. Ethan's 3.5. I didn't want as big an age gap as that, but it is like that because of my postpartum recovery, my health issues, being apart. Being apart is a big thing. And so actually, when you look at it, we've probably really only had about 8 cycles. So that's less than a year. And if we were to look back in my diary, I bet we missed some of that. So maybe 7 cycles. And when you put it like that, it doesn't seem as unlikely that we might not be pregnant yet, because even if you're in your, less than 35, the doctors will always say you've got to try for a year. You've got to try for like 12 cycles, because normally statistics say after like 12 cycles, after a year, the chance of you getting pregnant are much higher. So when you consider that, and also with my age and Pete's age being older, then it's going to take a bit longer than that. Then it's actually made me feel better. And it's thought, to reason that out. And sometimes it is worth doing that. And I know we had this the same when we were trying to conceive even the first time, there were a lot of things where actually when we looked at the months that we were trying to conceive, there were things that were against us, whether it was health, whether it was being separated. You tried to get together, but it wasn't and it's not about being perfect, but kind of reasoning that out does also help. I won't lie, it's been a constant worry that it's not happened yet. Also, I worry on a daily basis that Ethan will not have a sibling and that the gap is getting bigger. And I know if you've not had a child yet, you might be thinking, well, I should be grateful. I have one, which I totally am. I give thanks every day for him. I absolutely adore him. But it's amazing this, I often feel really guilty because I know that we struggled to get him, so we are so grateful. But also it's this sort of thought that I see him when he's playing on his own, and I just think, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to have another sibling? It's not the same urgency as the first time. It is a very different journey. It is very different. But I just wanted to, I suppose, express that in case some of you are thinking, well, you've got one, how can it be the same thing? One thing that kind of does make me feel better when I think about it is that when they've done studies around the world for healthy gaps between children, they've actually found that 4 years is actually a very healthy gap between children, which is very interesting, and particularly if you are an older mother where there are potentially more, there are more risks, and therefore it's about reducing those risks. It's about, mitigating for those risks as much as possible. But 4 years, particularly in more traditional communities, is a traditional gap because the child is likely to be more healthy. Your previous child is much more capable of doing things, so therefore they're not going to require you as much, in where you've got two smaller children. So that kind of, I keep going with that in my head, that actually, 4 years is quite a classic gap, and that also kind of makes me feel better. I think the other thing is, what gets me through this is I have a really deep-seated belief that we will get pregnant and have another child. Some might say this is really silly, especially at my age at 43, but I do have hope. How and when that will happen, I cannot, I'm not sure of that. I'm not strong every day, but most of the day I'm fine. And I know you might also be thinking, how can I work with other women going through subfertility? But actually, do you know what? I'm more than fine with this. And I really enjoy helping women. I enjoy helping you to, make those small changes, make the big changes. It is a step-by-step process to improve your fertility. And when I get news of someone I've worked with that they've got pregnant and then they've gone on and had their baby, it just, honestly, I'm over the moon about it. And I have to say, I have never once felt jealous or sad for myself, which sometimes I find quite surprising that happens, because I know it is something that is very common. But I just get strength knowing that I'm helping others from my personal journey and, with my personal struggles, that I can then turn them on my head, turn it on its head. And, the knowledge that I've learned along the way so that I can pass on these successes and teach so that, you can avoid my pitfalls. Now, I know I'm rambling on already, so I don't want to do that, but I thought it might be better to list out what I've done to work on my recovery. So here we go. I've got a list of things which I'm going to talk around. Key things I've done, and the order I've done them in is how I've presented them. But please bear in mind that I was a bit of a hot mess. And this is not not the case for everybody. Not everybody has as many things going on. Everybody's different. And when I have my clients come to me, no one person is the same. There are similar trends in there, but people have definitely got different things that, a different combination of things that are going on, and people don't necessarily have everything that's going on. What I will say is that I've actually had very limited endo symptoms. So this time it's definitely been much less about the endo and much more about the postpartum recovery. And some of the major systems, for example, the gut and hormone, gut and my hormone balance. And I could literally do an episode on each of these things, to be honest. So bear in mind, when I have done these things, I've also been using myself as a test case. I've been learning on myself, and some of these things are because I've been going I've been doing additional deep dive training into certain things. So that's why I've kind of like deep dived into some of the things. Right. First up, postpartum nutritional care. So from when Ethan was born, I've been pretty good at making sure that my nutrition has been wholesome. It's been plant-based and rich with collagen and healing meats and fish. And I've taken a variety of supplements at different times. And I've, had to do different diets, restrictions at various times to support specific healing processes, which I'll come on to mention. So I have the nutrition piece because of my training, my interest. I have been pretty good at focusing on that. There are areas which I'll come on to which I've not been particularly good, which I think are still issues, which I'm kind of just coming to address now. But the nutrition piece, I have been pretty good. And it is really, really important because when you're breastfeeding, the toll on your body and your nutritional requirements are actually even greater than during pregnancy. So it is really important that when breastfeeding, that you do have a really good, wholesome nutrition so that you're not then depleting from your resources to pass on your pass on the nutrition through the breast milk. Because one thing that is not, and again, this could be a completely different topic, but when you are breastfeeding, what is not taught to us is that breast milk can be of different qualities. So if you don't have a nutritious diet, that breast milk is not going to be as nutritious as if you're having a wholesome nutritional diet. And that is really important to know. So if there's all this pressure that breastfeeding is the best, breast is best on mothers, which is really quite hard because actually, if you are nutritionally depleted, if you have postpartum depression, all these other things, well, actually, do you know what? Sometimes bottle feeding with, I can't think of the word now, bottle feeding with powdered milk, I can't think of the word, could actually be in those scenarios actually a better option. So, and I'd love to at some point do a podcast in the future about the postpartum breastfeeding nutritional care around all of that, and something that I do work with clients on. Anyway, the next up, blood testing. So I've done reasonably regular testing with my doctor, who is fantastic. She is just amazing and has been really good at facilitating my requests. And I've had to do some of them privately also, things like monitoring my thyroid, just because there are restrictions within the NHS on some of the things that just are not tested. I would definitely say that my thyroid has yo-yoed up and down between being hypo and hyper in the first year, which is actually totally normal. But again, nobody tells you this. Overall, my bloods have been pretty good. My iron and B12 is something I struggle with, as is my fasting glucose, both common with all of my ladies, actually. I think it's a trait related to endometriosis. I say I know it is, and they found that in various research as well. Now, the third thing that I tried is Chinese herbs. So about 18 months ago, I tried Chinese herbs again with the same practitioner we went to before our first pregnancy in Kent. Now, at the time, we swore these herbs really helped us get pregnant the first time. And I think they really did help. They really did help. They helped both of us. My husband took them. I had the ones which you boil up in a pan, and oh my God, they absolutely stank the house out. Got to the point where actually I was banned from doing it in the house, had to do it outside on a camping stove. Pete took herbal pills, and we had acupuncture with a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner near us in Yorkshire. But I won't lie, he was pretty dreadful. And this was when, with all the lockdowns, and you were able to go to a practitioner, but I couldn't find anyone else. But he was terrible, actually. He was really violent with the needles. I don't know, his technique was just awful. They would hurt, like not just to hurt a little bit, they would hurt excruciatingly. And I've had quite a lot of acupuncture from different practitioners over the years, but this wasn't normal. And it ended up being that my nervous system was just on this high alert. Every time I went, I just couldn't relax. I would just be really, nervous about going into it. And Pete, my husband, also found exactly the same. And we decided actually we're going to stop. So that is something to bear in mind, is that if they are painful, it's just not normal. Find someone else. Since then, we found a fantastic practitioner who is amazing, and he's really, really gentle with the needles and really aware of that. Now, in terms of the Chinese herbs, interestingly, this time they just didn't sit well with me. I used to get really hot and flushed after taking them, horrendous headaches. And after 2 months, I realized that I was actually having terrible histamine reactions. And it was then that I realized I was totally overloaded with histamines. And this was because my gut health was really poor and I was struggling to break down the histamine. I was always missing key bacteria. And interestingly, when I actually asked my Chinese practitioner who is supplying the herbs for the translation, and then I looked up into them, a couple of the things within the herbs were things that were high in histamine. So it wasn't there was necessarily anything wrong with the herbs. It's just I had an issue which then I couldn't deal with, where previously I'd obviously not had that issue with it. So I stopped, because when you've got a histamine issue, it's like having a bucket full of water. And if you keep putting the histamines in and you've got a blocked plug, you're just going to overflow it and get loads of symptoms. And you need to deal with stopping the intake of the histamines and deal with sort of like unblocking that plug, getting to the root cause as to what's going on and fixing it. So I did my first gut microbiome test at that point, and I found I had really poor digestive function. I found I had a number of opportunistic nasties that had increased my histamine levels, that had overgrown due to poor levels of beneficial bacteria. And I had some pathogenic bacteria which affect fertility, and I had a parasite, and I had candida. So quite a lot was going on. So I kind of set about working on this. I was on a low histamine diet, and and that really helped restore my health. It was then, I'd known that I'd had a bad gut for years. And prior to getting pregnant with Ethan, I'd worked a lot on just through nutrition, but not with testing or anything like that. I'd had all the symptoms of, chronic IBS in my early 20s. I'd suffered for many, 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 many years. And I had, all the symptoms of sort of like candida through the years, with athlete's foot and funny elbows and this, that, and the other. So I'd kind of known, but not tackled the issue. And it wasn't until I kind of got more into the functional world of things and trying to understand that root cause and using functional testing and nutrition to work and heal on it, that I then was like, I need to look at what's going on with me. So, and the thing is, your gut health, and I've said it before, is really important to kind of work on that, because otherwise you are going to pass that on to your baby. And I've definitely passed on some of those issues to Ethan. I think my main concern is the candida. He's definitely got some signs of that, and it's something that I've been changing and working on with him, but also working on for me, so that I don't pass it on to my next baby. So next thing that I've been working on is genetic testing. Now, I won't go into this massively, but it's very insightful to know what genes in relation to fertility and endo I have. And it's been an important part of my puzzle. I did a 23andMe test, which if I did it again, I wouldn't do it. There's far better tests out there like LifeCode GX. I did this test about 2 years ago, but I actually didn't interpret it, because I kind of got the test results, didn't really know what to do with them. They didn't really tell me much. They kind of told me about, I had funny earlobe shapes and a few of the sort of in-depth things, but it really just told me, what ethnicity I kind of came from, and all sorts of like actually quite pointless things, nothing that was really going to help. I then, have since with my training, you can then put the data through a algorithm software and get the data out and actually read the genes behind it. And once I did that, and I've learned because I've been doing a fertility apprenticeship with Angela Heap, who's an amazing nutritional therapist in the fertility space, like leading in her area. And I've learned so much from her. And I've learned that I've got issues with my methylation, with my MTHR, MTRR, MTR, MTHFR. There's loads of different genes. And it basically means that I struggle to convert folic acid. I also, don't restore damaged B12, which has been shown to impair fertility and also increase risk during pregnancy and birth. So, they're some of the basic ones. I take folate and extra B12 to help with this. I've got a number of slow detoxification genes, both in phase 1 and phase 2. And I know these are definitely turned on because I've seen it with the Dutch test, which I'll come on to. And, it explains a lot of the issues with the estrogen dominance with my endo symptoms. And it's something that I've seen with clients where they've done their genetic tests as well, that it's just that this classic, your liver detoxification genes are often impaired. And I think this definitely makes and is part of the endo picture. And then it exasperates and makes, and doesn't help with fertility either. So I've been working on nutritional support over the years. And, when I don't work as hard, I feel some symptoms, my endo symptoms return. So, for me, working and supporting my liver is a really, really important thing. I've also got a slow PEMT gene, PMT, which affects cell walls, brain and liver, and can cause pregnancy, digestive and liver issues. And that explains a lot. And there's various things that you can do nutritionally to help keep that gene clean. It's something that, if you think about it like dirty, Ben Lynch, Dr. Ben Lynch, he's amazing in the sort of genetic field. He talks about dirty genes and clean genes, i.e. you have a gene, it just depends. If you're making it dirty, then it's going to act up and cause you problems. Whereas if you keep it clean, if you keep your body clean and support those genes, then actually they're going to work more efficiently. So one of my other ones is my VDR gene is slow or homozygous, which means my vitamin D receptor is affected. And vitamin D is really important for fertility, such as implantation and development of placenta. And also, as we know, it's extremely important in the immune system, which is related with endo as well. So I regularly check my vitamin D levels and supplement accordingly as well. And that is really important because low vitamin D is really not a good thing at all. And you really want to be having optimal vitamin D. But having high vitamin D, so like having higher than 225, medical community doesn't like it higher than 150. I actually like it around that area, and so do others, for an optimal level. But if you're higher than 200, then it can be toxic. So you don't want to just randomly take vitamin D willy-nilly and not test, because it can go really high. And I had that with a client recently. I almost forgot, I mentioned earlier, I've done the Dutch test. I did this about 1 year postpartum, which was interesting, but not totally useful because I probably did it a bit too soon because of my hormones, because I was still breastfeeding. Things weren't quite back there, and it told me I was knackered. My adrenals needed support. My sex hormones were really low. So my estrogen was really low, my testosterone, my progesterone. If I could do another one, I would definitely do one now, but financially I can't. So I've just kind of like parked it. Maybe one day I'll do another one to see a comparison. I've ended up, but I could do a whole thing on the Dutch test. The Dutch test is fantastic. And if you're doing the Dutch test, you want to do cycle mapping for fertility, because if you just do a 1 day Dutch test, it is literally just like a 1 day window. And with endo, you can be having peaks in estrogen in the second half of your cycle, and you're not going to see that with a 1 day. Whereas the cycle mapping, which is more expensive, it's definitely worth it because you get to see what's going on, when you're ovulating. Have you got enough progesterone? Have you got enough estrogen? Because, even with endo, sometimes, and I have it probably with half my ladies, they actually don't have enough estrogen at the beginning of their cycle, which is when it's needed, and then have these estrogen peaks later on, which is causing a lot of sort of the endo symptoms to worsen. So another one I ended up doing is the organic acids test and mycotoxin test. This was more to accompany some functional training that I was doing. But from that, I found lots of candida, which I already knew, but I had lots of candida byproducts. Some of my neurotransmitters, so these are to do with your brain health, were on the low side, such as dopamine, which is sort of your calm hormone. And I had a couple of mold byproducts, which is rather interesting, but not surprising, because we've got mold in our military house, which, don't get me started, they will not sort out. And we're just having to live it. I've got a couple of cupboards and whole understairs with no floor because it's just mold that I just don't open. But interesting, it did show that my liver is actually dealing with the mold pretty well, because they're, if they were in the green, I still need to get rid of them, because mold is something that does affect fertility. And so I'm supporting my liver with a variety of binders. And I will be glad when we're leaving the house soon, I'm not going to lie, because it has been a worry, and there are times where I've really got quite emotional about it when I've been on the phone trying to sort it out. And I'm just thinking, is this the reason why we aren't conceiving, is because there's mold in the house, and, the specific strains that I've got on me are ones that are going to affect fertility. I don't know. And until we leave the house, there's not too much I can do about it. Then I did a Candida protocol. I did that in January. It's something I've had a problem with, like I said, since I was a teenager. So the results weren't that surprising. And I knew for years, but at the time I just didn't want to do anything about it. When I was doing the endo course, self-study course of Melissa's, who I interviewed in, I think it's episode 3, there was a whole bit on Candida and addressing Candida, but I actually never got to that because I got pregnant. So I knew that I needed to address this, Candida and face it by the horns and deal with it. And it's amazing. I did a fairly strict 2-month Candida protocol. There are strict ways of doing it. There are, ways that you can address it over a longer time period that is not quite as strict in removing all the carbohydrates. But what was really interesting is I totally saw the benefits of my cycle, my fatigue levels and my brain fog. And my sugar cravings. The whole Candida thing can be huge. And interestingly, I was doing it with a client at the same time, and the effects that she felt after it was also quite amazing. But interestingly, did you know that 70% of women with endometriosis have gut Candida? And it can really affect your blood sugar, imbalance your hormones, and have a knock-on. It's not a direct effect, but it's a knock-on effect on fertility, in the fact that, they're stealing nutrition, stealing resources, affecting your blood sugar, and blood sugar then has an impact on fertility, imbalancing hormones, that has an effect on fertility. So, and what's interesting also is Candida has a connection with mercury. So when you're overloaded in mercury, it can aid in boosting Candida. I won't go into how that happens. So then what else have I tried? Acupuncture, hand pressure and moxibustion. Since December, I've been doing this, and I've been seeing this amazing Korean acupuncturist, Dr. Jong Bate in Darlington, who I really want to interview. Actually, I've asked him and he will come on the podcast, just got to work out when. He's leading in fertility and happened to be not that far from where we are. It's a bit of a trek to go and see him, but we've really committed to this, and Pete has also, and Pete has seen some dramatic results in his health. As I said, he wasn't too good when he came back from tour, and he's really come around from that. My progress has been a bit slower, in part because of my lack of sleep. So my body's just not had this ability to heal in the way it should do. So my issues have been damp, which is Candida, which I've been working through, and also low chi or energy. And again, I've known this, low energy, lack of sleep thing has been quite big, and it is slowly returning. I'm definitely feeling better. And as I speak, actually this week, I'm very pleased with myself. I've really got getting back into a yoga routine in the mornings, finding time for me. And I've decided that I'm going to do some running again, very small, short, nothing extreme, but because I find for my mental health, it really helps just to get out. There's a river near us, and I kind of do a very slow jog. And I know there's this, there is, and I say it to clients as well about running. It does put you into the fight or flight. But equally, I've got to this point where I'm like, actually, I sometimes just need to get out for my mind. And I think if you're doing it occasionally, if it's going to help your mindset and it outweighs everything else, and you feel good. And the key thing is, if you feel good afterwards and you still feel good the next day, if you're feeling drained or tired, then it's too much and it will be too taxing on you. And, like I said, I felt like I've been sabotaging myself also because I've not been going to bed early. And this is like a key thing for me, is I've just had too much to do. I've put a lot of passion into my work as well. in growing my business, in working with my clients, in doing further study, trying to improve myself there. And so I've been burning the candle at both ends. And I suppose if I hadn't have done that and I'd been going to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock, which I should do when I know that Ethan's waking up how many times a night, then my postpartum recovery journey perhaps wouldn't have been as extended. And that's something that I may, if I was to turn back the clock, I would change that element and focus definitely more on my personal health. So blood sugar testing and balancing. I've been really working on my blood sugar for around a year now. And this is such a complicated subject, as the reasons why blood sugar can be an issue can be complex. In my instance, I've had it coming for years, and something that I learned from I can't remember her name now, but an amazing functional nutritionist over in the States, and she, is an expert in the whole diabetes realm. And she said, actually, it takes about 20 years to develop diabetes. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a whole progress stage where you're moving up each stage, and you're going into insulin resistance and pre-diabetes, and there's even pre-insulin resistance. So it's not something that happens overnight. And I have to say, I think I've been walking that, looking back at it, it's been coming for years. I used to smoke years ago. I always had a sugary drink when I did that. I had a sweet tooth. I would snack all the time because I think I know that I've got an addictive gene. And so I've always worked really hard, burnt the candle at both ends, not necessarily eating very well. It might have been toast and peanut butter, toast and jam, go down to the petrol station in the middle of the night because I'm working on something, and going back, grab a bag of crisps and some sweets. Yeah, that was me. And so, I've been walking into it. And actually, I looked over some old bloods from 6 years ago, and I had a fasting glucose of 6.9. I'm not going to lie, I was absolutely furious when I looked back at this, because the doctor at the time never picked this up. Because, to clarify, 7 is classified as diabetes. And again, depending on which area you're in as well, because the lab values are a range which are determined by the community which it's tested on. So one area might be 6.9, it might be 7.1, slightly variant. So basically at 6.9, someone should have said to me, you have, or you're almost literally going to have diabetes, you need to sort this out. But nobody said anything to me. So was it any surprise that I got gestational diabetes when I was pregnant? I'm not going to go on about it because, again, I could go all day about it. But blood sugar is massive, and it affects all our sex hormones, especially our thyroid and progesterone production. And so it's something that's critical to get on top of. And it's something that we can all do fairly easily when you know what you need to do. I mean, recently I used a continual glucose monitor, and this was really insightful. I just did 15 days. And I would like to do an episode or post on Instagram about this as well. It's also why I literally now get every client to test their fasting blood glucose levels to see where they're at, because you can get your fasting glucose tested by the doctor. You can get your H1A-BC, your hemoglobin H1BC, which gives an average over 3 months, but that gives an average. And if you're having high peaks and high lows, then your average, because if you're going up and then coming down again and fluctuating a lot, your average could be actually fine. And so it's not necessarily that picture. And again, with a fasting glucose, if you've had a good night's sleep and you didn't particularly have a bad meal before, it might be okay. And also their threshold, like I said, of okay is very different from optimal, which you want for fertility. And, endometriosis, there is definitely a link with endometriosis, poor gut health. They all affect your blood sugar balance. So it is something to definitely be looking into. And if you're not already, then check out Glucose Goddess. She is amazing on Instagram. She has just written a fantastic book called, let me have a look. It's called Glucose Revolution. It's just mind-blowing. So if that's the one tip that I can tell you today, is follow her and sort out your blood glucose. I recently redid my gut microbiome test as I felt I was struggling again. It's shown that I have improved my beneficial bacteria, but my upper digestive function is still poor, i.e. my stomach acid and my pancreas, and I'm taking stronger action here. Now, when it comes to functional nutrition, functional medicine, the key thing is why. You always ask why. Why is like that? Because you can fix it. But if you don't ask why, and then for me, it's because I think I'm just too busy. I need to slow down. I need to really focus on being calm when I eat, which is really difficult when you have a toddler. It's something that's, and a baby, because eating is just cram some food in your mouth and you're, constantly having to pay attention to them. You don't have the luxury of having something to calm to eat. So that is definitely a difficult part of the picture. And it shows that I often put my needs second to others, which is only natural when you're a mother, but it's also in my personality anyway. And the test showed that I had another parasite. So I dealt with the previous parasite and that was no longer pressing. So as time was ticking, because I literally just redid this last month, I decided, when I also discussed this, with the laboratory and fellow practitioners, actually just seek the doctor's health. I'm not going to take this long road of trying to deal with the parasite naturally, because again, it depends whether you've got more time or less time. And I decided, I'm going to take antibiotics. It's the first time in years that I've taken, I think 10 years I've taken antibiotic. But parasites can really steal so much from us nutritionally. And I thought, I just want to fix this. And, I did this also supporting my gut microbiome, taking a very high dose probiotics, various other things, as well, to support my gut microbiome whilst I was taking the antibiotics, so it wasn't going to be such a negative effect. But because sort of time was constrained and with my age and all the other things, I just wanted to get on with it. So just going back to that, often in situations, when I work with clients, sometimes there are calls where it's like, what you need, you need a combination of conventional medicine and nutrition and herbs and whatnot. It depends if you're going for IVF, very soon, then it's like, you just need to deal with this, get on with it, deal with it, and help on, eradicate what's going on and help restore your body as quickly as possible. If you're younger, you've got more time and you don't particularly want to use, some people don't want to use antibiotics, then they can take the longer route. It's totally personal preference and there's no judgment around either. I did a vaginal microbiome test about 2 years ago as part of my training, but I was still breastfeeding at the time and I wanted to do one again recently. Now, it was quite interesting. Back then, it showed that I had what's called a transitional community. I didn't have any sort of nasties, but I did have a lactobacillus species that can either be protective or it can be a troublemaker. And it just depends. And I think back then, because I was breastfeeding, my estrogen levels were quite low. It was in a sort of what's called a transitional community state. And so I thought, I'm going to retest it in case it's gone and caused trouble. Because if it's caused trouble, then that can be causing an issue for fertility. And I'm glad I did it, because it came back that I've got a number of bacterial vaginosis species. And again, I've still got this Lactobacillus inus, which is this less protective vaginal microbiome community. So I've been working to improve this, because BV has been shown in so many studies to affect fertility and particularly to increase risks of issues during pregnancy. So it is a really key thing. And actually now when I work with clients, I now say that all clients have to do a vaginal microbiome test as a compulsory. It's not because also BV, 50% of women will have had BV at some point in their life. And also 50% of women who have BV are non-symptomatic. And with endometriosis in studies, they've actually found that endometriosis itself seems to affect the balance of women's microbiomes. So it is important to see what's going on and whether you're inflamed, and there's a lot you can do for this. So now literally today, well, actually it wasn't today, it was last week, 2 weeks ago, when I actually made my notes. I started a fantastic group course with a lady called Amber Sawyer on core awakening to work on strengthening my pelvic floor and also to reconnect my floor through yoga, because I've struggled with my pelvic floor since having had Ethan. And this is probably because it wasn't strong beforehand, and I knew it wasn't strong beforehand. I have trouble going on a trampoline. I have trouble when I sneeze, and it's something that I need to work on. And many women with endo actually have their pelvic floor is too strong. So it might be too weak or too strong, but they both have just implications on your pelvic health. And it is really, it can be a really important part of people's healing journey, is to understand what's going on with the pelvic floor with endometriosis. It might be that your pelvic floor is strong on one side and weak on the other side, and it's skewing you, and that might be pulling your womb out of position. So yeah, it is something. So for me, I'm really looking forward to this course. I'm really enjoying it. And what's interesting about this is she dives into kind of like the emotional and spiritual connection with your womb, and trying to see if you've got any emotional blocks to that. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I've also done some emotional freedom technique or tapping meditations as well, from example like Circle and Bloom. And finally, I've literally started at the beginning of this month doing some ultrasound cycle monitoring down in London, which is with CDS, with Dr. Bill Smith, who is just a leader in the field. And I know he's helped so many women. I wanted to do about 2 or 3 cycles, but it depends on what we can fit in before Pete leaves. And this is just to check my progesterone, because through body basal monitoring, I know that the last 7 days of my cycle, my progesterone drops off, and the plan is to do it now before Pete leaves. And then when we move to Oman and we've settled in, and if we're not pregnant, then we will start going down the IVF route. What is interesting from the monitoring so far is that my lining actually does slightly disintegrate straight after ovulation, and so I really have been in need of progesterone. Pessary is something really strong, so it'll be interesting to see what happens here. And actually already I've noticed I feel a lot calmer. I actually, in hindsight, probably my PMS symptoms were getting a bit more increased, and particularly because I am starting to notice some perimenopausal elements. So it's something that comes when women are sort of getting pregnant in their 40s, particularly post 43. There are those sort of perimenopausal symptoms that compound and make things a little bit more difficult, that you kind of just have to find the wave and ride the wave, as it were. And I didn't mention that I also, I've also reviewed Pete's sperm and bloods, and been working on his health to make sure that it's optimal to match mine, to improve the chances, because obviously mine is more hindered. So there we are. That's quite a journey, writing that all down. It's been quite cathartic, and if for whatever reason we're not successful, I can safely say that we tried. I've tried everything. I've been turning every stone over, addressing the things that I find. But I have this belief that everything that's been thrown at me, that it's God's way, or it's the universe's way of telling me that it's something else that I need to learn to help others. Because it's really weird when I learn something, then someone comes to me and they've got those issues. So, it's the way that I handle it, is how I personally handle it. I mean, sometimes, occasionally, I'm like, oh, for goodness sake, there's something else that's, been thrown at me. But it is the way that I deal with it. And as when I find things with myself, my clients, like I've said, they seem to present this as well. So what do I think the root causes of all the issues are that have turned up? And I think this is a really good thing to look at, is to try and, because this is what the functional approach is to understand what's at the bottom of it, to understand why I've got poor digestion, poor, blood sugar imbalances, etc. So to summarize, I turned around my health considerably to get pregnant the first time. I believe that I'm still nutritionally suboptimal on some elements, such as B6, magnesium. I suffered terribly, like with scream-worthy cramps during pregnancy and awful sickness for about 16, 17 weeks, which are connected to the sickness, connected to B6, and the cramps connected to the magnesium. And, my hormones were absolutely crazy during birth, all over the place. And interestingly, when I've spoken to a variety of women with endo, I do think endo does have an effect on, on our hormones as well during pregnancy. So it is an interesting thing to be aware of. I had gestational diabetes, which obviously, like I said, indicated I went into pregnancy with blood sugar issues. And again, like I said, it doesn't happen overnight. It took a long time to get there. So coupled with the general recovery from birth, which is no mean feat, starting a new career in my own business, and studying and lack of sleep, it's meant my nervous system has just been chronically stressed, which affects blood sugar, digestive function, hormones and fertility. And I feel that for me, rest and sleep are huge things, along with physical movement, which is as important as nutrition. And some people actually say that if you don't physically move, or if you have eat something unhealthy, just by moving will improve actually how that is received within your body. So movement has a big impact. It's not just all about nutrition. Movement and sleep and allowing your body to heal are really, really key. So, these are my two nemesis, and what I have been and trying to work with when I go through fits and starts. I think, like I said before, if I hadn't set my business up, things would be different. For me, it's what I've dreamed of. It's been a balancing act, being a military wife, being moved around. I didn't want to be commuting to London or not having a job. For me, I enjoy working and it's part of who I am. And it was about finding something that I enjoy doing and, having to start from scratch and build something up. And so it has taken a lot and the timing hasn't been great. But you could also say it has been. So it's been an interesting one. So from this is, do you find that if you dig deep enough, there is something that you know that you need to do, but you're struggling to do it? So inside that something is affecting your health and your fertility and you need to do it. And that's where actually journaling can be really useful to try and pull that out. So what would I do differently already or in terms of what I've struggled with? Well, as I've been self-treating, this could be hard. I have sought help out here and there from colleagues in some instances, but it's always more difficult. And so things have been slower than I would have done if I'd been a client, both because of time and financially also. Ideally, when Pete was away on a 6-month tour, I should have done a ton of testing and protocols to deal with things then. But literally, I was in survival mode. I couldn't cope with that, doing that as well. And this is where seeking help can be more effective as you focus on what you need more effectively than finding your way in the dark. As I said earlier, I would focus more on sleep and exercise. Those precious nap times during the early postpartum, I should have slept instead of studying or working. I shouldn't have worked late in the night so that I could cope with those interrupted sleeps from Ethan, which still happens now, but I'm now using bribery at the moment to try and get him to sleep through the night, which is working a little bit. There's been mum guilt that comes in. You're torn between being a modern age working mother, between being a mother, a wife, working, or I want to, being a daughter, a friend, so much more. So that's quite an interesting thing to juggle, to be honest. And I think I need to let go a bit in terms of work. And it's what I've been doing, I know that I'll be doing in coming months is just, doing the things that I need to, but also putting myself first, but not just to do with work, to do with, how I mother, how I parent, how I'm a wife, and actually saying, do you know what, I need some time for me. And it's what I've literally started doing this weekend. I've spent the most amazing weekend with some dear old girlfriends of mine, some of my best friends that I've known for over 30 years, one in fact 40 years. And it just, chatting with them, it just reminded me that I need to find some time to myself, because when you've got time to yourself, to have some mindfulness, to do some exercise, do some yoga, whatever it is you want to do that makes you happy as a person, then you're going to be a happier wife, a happier mother, a happier sister, a happier daughter, whatever it is. And then when you're happy as well, your body feels happy and safe, and that is all part of the picture as well. It's not just about food and testing and this, that and the other. And so actually I have to say the last 3 days with having a bit of time in the morning to myself starts my whole day off so much better. So the question I asked my interviewees is, what one thing would I give you to take away from this episode? So I'm going to ask the same question. My answer is sleep. It is when we heal, the lack of it causes chronic stress. It's critical to our physical, mental and spiritual well-being. And sorting it out is totally free. I talk about it with my clients. Yes, it's something I don't walk the walk. So take a look at your sleep hygiene. Do you go to bed too late? Are you having interrupted sleep? Why can you not sleep? If you're having issues, then start here, and it will really, really help your health. Help your health. My action from this is to start walking my talk, starting these new healthy habits. I want to carry on the healthy habits that I'm talking about, making sure that I prioritize getting into bed at a reasonable time so that I can then get up and do the things I want to in the morning. Otherwise, frankly, I'm just wasting my money on supplements and acupuncture and testing that I've been doing because I'm sort of, not doing the other things which I need to, which actually don't cost anything. So that wasn't a short episode. Yet again, sorry about that. It's funny, once I start writing and talking, it just seems to come out. I hope you found it helpful and not overwhelming. I would love to know your thoughts. Do send me a message, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, or my email. So I'm going to do next episode is going to be next week, and it's an interview with Alison Hall, a nutritional therapist who specialises in miscarriage. We talk about how you can make changes in your nutrition and lifestyle to reduce the risks. And I think you'll find this really helpful. And Alison is she's a wonderful, lovely, lovely person. And I really enjoyed connecting with her. I felt like I'd known her for years. So it was just wonderful. And I know that you will like it too. So have a great week. I hope you enjoy listening to this, and I'll catch you next week. Take care. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and have some useful tips and actions you can take away and put into practice. This podcast is to add to your knowledge so you can delve into the whys behind your endo and fertility struggles and move forward with thriving and conceiving. It is not meant to replace your current medical advice. If you loved listening, then make sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes. It would be amazing if you could take a minute to leave a review, as it will help in reaching more women who might benefit. Even better, if you know someone who would love to listen to this episode, then please share. If you want to find out more about who I am and what I do, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I also have a private Facebook group, Thrive and Conceive with Endometriosis, where I share all sorts of nutrition and health nuggets. My website, endofertilityspecialist.com, provides you with lots of information, including my Endofertility one-to-one health coaching program. Lastly, don't forget to sign up to my Endofertility Inner Circle to receive weekly news. The links are all in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you next week for another episode.